Welcome to DNSN Radio, your one-stop destination for DevNation breaking news and analysis. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and welcome to episode number 2 as we take a deep dive into the NFC West. Some people have called the NFC West the most difficult division in DevNation this year. Is that statement true or false? Let's dive into the teams, and you can decide for yourself. We'll start off with the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals boast a 6-0 record heading into Week 7. They have wins over the Rams, the Bengals, the Seahawks, the Browns, and then 2 road victories over the Panthers and the Steelers. Their average margin of victory so far this year is 24.5 points, which is a remarkable number, and you can see some of the blowouts that they've had so far this year. But another notable thing is they've only played 2 teams with winning records so far. So how much of that is caused by weak opponents and how much of it is caused by their dominance as the reigning champions? On offense, they said Forsora was crazy when he traded Steven Leonard and replaced him with a slow development rookie this year. But that rookie so far hasn't influenced the offense as they boast 42.8 points per game, which is second in the league, and they have 455 yards per game, good for 4th in the league. That slow dev rookie that I mentioned is quarterback B.J. Wright, who through 6 games has completed 62% of his passes for 18 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. And his QBR of 124.7 is incredible for a rookie, and he leads the league in total yards. He's complemented by a trio of very talented pass catchers. First of all, we have tight end A.C. Leonard, who has 29 receptions for 531 yards and 4 touchdowns. Complemented on the outside by rookie wide receiver Alante Crawford, who has 21 catches for 494 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then wide receiver Josh Brown, the veteran, is the deep threat for the Cardinals as he averages almost 30 yards per catch at 29.9 and has 4 touchdowns. And yes, we didn't forget about him, running back Dree Archer, who has ungodly speed. There's been rumors around the league that the league is currently investigating Archer for HGH use, and so we'll see if that comes into play later in this season. But for now, he's been a dominant force, getting 656 yards on 120 carries, averaging 5.5 yards per carry for 8 touchdowns. And he's added another 324 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns to bring his total all-purpose yards through 6 games just shy of 1,000 yards and 10 scores. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, the Cardinals are very solid. They're not all offense and no defense. They allow 21.6 points per game, which is 5th in the league, 390 yards per game, which is 20th, and they have a plus 21.2 scoring differential. They're led in the middle of the field by veteran Bobby Wagner, who has 54 tackles, including 4 tackles for loss and 1 interception. Their defensive line is having an incredible year as defensive ends Calais Campbell and Marvin Jordan have combined for 15.5 sacks, and the team has 27 sacks on the season, which is over 4 per game, and they've picked the ball off 21 times. Now, granted, that was padded a bit by an epic Cam Newton meltdown in Week 5, as only Cam can do. But nonetheless, they are off to an impressive start as a defensive unit. And so how did the Cardinals make the playoffs? Well, first of all, they make the playoffs if the wheels don't fall off. They're playing incredible football right now. And anyone that argues otherwise just doesn't know what they're talking about. The Cardinals have destroyed their opponents this season and look very strong and as a favorite to repeat as champions. Another key point is that quarterback B.J. Wright can't fall apart under pressure. He's played very well through 6 games, but can he continue to shine as the stage gets bigger and as the target on their back continues to get bigger? And then lastly, I know it's nitpicking, but when a team is playing this well, you have to nitpick to find something to say. But their defense is 5th overall in rushing yards allowed and 28th overall in passing yards. And so they need to tighten up their pass defense and not just rely on interceptions if they want to make the most of this season. Next up, we'll look at the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers are sporting a 4-1 record with wins over the Redskins and the Ravens, a very close loss on the road against the Atlanta Falcons, and coming off of back-to-back blowout wins against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Cleveland Browns. On offense, they average 40 points per game, which is good for 4th in the league, with 423 yards per game, good for 5th. They also lead the league in rushing yards per game at 181. They're led by quarterback Joey Gomes, who's a second-year player. He got limited reps last year, but this year he takes the reins over from Colin Kaepernick, and he's stepped up beautifully. He has a 75.5% completion percentage, and he's got 1,274 yards, 15 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions for a QBR of 143. He's also added 104 rushing yards on the ground. Then their number one receiver is tight end Sanchez Terrell. By the way, who names these guys? Sanchez Terrell? Really? But I digress. He has 21 catches for 428 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then Amir Abdullah has 110 carries for 654 yards, which is an astonishing 5.9 yards per carry, and has 7 touchdowns. He also adds 270 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. There are no notable wide receivers really to speak of. They haven't been very involved in this passing offense. It's been a huge drop-off after Sanchez Terrell and Amir Abdullah, who account for 56% of the passing offense. So Gomes has he's mostly relied on the security blanket of his tight end and halfback, and so we'll see how that plays out down the stretch. Defensively, the 49ers are very solid. They allow 22.2 points per game, good for 8th in the league. 330 yards per game, good for 13th. And they're the 4th best in the league against the run, allowing only 67 yards per game. And that's all good for a 17.8 point differential. Middle linebacker Marco Davis leads this team in tackles with 36 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 3 interceptions. And as a team, they've forced 13 turnovers and sacked the quarterback 12 times. So how do the 49ers make the playoffs? The 49ers make the playoffs. For them to do that, I believe they need their wide receivers to take a step forward. I don't think it's good enough to rely solely on your tight end and running back as pass catchers. As you play more difficult defenses, they'll key off on that. And so it's very important that these wide receivers get more involved in the offense. It's also important that Joey Gomes continues to play at a high level despite his inexperience. But one thing they have going for them is the 49ers know how to win with inexperienced quarterbacks in the playoffs, as Colin Kaepernick took over for Alex Smith during a playoff run a few years ago, and it seems only fitting that several years later Colin Kaepernick loses his job to another inexperienced quarterback. And finally, they need to circle their matchup with the Cardinals on the calendar, Week 9 and Week 15. The 49ers want the division, and a bye, not a date with another powerhouse NFC opponent on Wild Card Weekend, which is what happened to them last year when they were beaten out by the very team we're talking about, the Arizona Cardinals, on Wild Card Weekend. So we hit the midpoint of our show here. I want to take a break and say the first person that will comment on this post with a meme will get their division to be the focus of the next DNSN Radio. And as tribute, I want to throw a couple of my favorite memes on the screen real quick. First one comes to us courtesy of Julio Jones, that awkward moment when Manti Te'o's girlfriend tackles you. Second one comes to us at the expense of the New York Jets. Sorry, Trevor. But it says, sorry, New England, but the Jets offered me something the Patriots couldn't. January and February off. And finally, we've got a good one of Roger Goodell here that says, so Oakland and Cleveland played in the finals. The NBA is a very strange place. So again, the first person to comment with a meme on this post will get their division to be featured next in our next DNSN Radio. So we move on now to the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks are 5-1 on the year. They have wins over the Browns, the Rams, a Week 3 loss to the Cardinals, and then victories over the Saints and the Falcons, and a pending sim win over the Bucs after some freezing issues last night. Their offense has 33 points per game, which is 10th in the league, and 419 yards per game, good for 6th. Quarterback Carson Scott is completing 55.5% of his passes for 1,731 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, which compiles into an 88.6 QBR. Tight end Jimmy Graham leads all receivers with 27 receptions for 609 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then Jermaine Kearse comes in second with 19 catches for 329 and a touchdown. Josh Gordon appears to be the deep threat of this offense as he averages 24.8 yards per catch and he has 2 touchdowns. On the ground, running back Cedric Avery has 85 carries for 330 yards, 3.9 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns. And then surprisingly, fullback Derek Coleman has 16 carries, and 7 of them are for touchdowns. So this guy does nothing but score touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, the Seahawks allow 28.2 points per game, which is 17th in the league. And they allow 415 yards per game, which is 26th. And they have a 4.8 point scoring differential. Strong safety Cam Chancellor anchors the middle of this defense, and he leads in tackles with 37 and has intercepted 3 passes. And left outside linebacker Jeremy Atuchu has 7 sacks, which leads the team. As a team, the Seahawks defense has recorded 16 sacks this year, and they've forced 17 turnovers. And so how do the Seahawks make the playoffs in this loaded division? Well, first of all, the running game is bad. It's flat out bad, 3.9 yards per carry, and the passing game is wildly inefficient. And yet they played the defending champs to a one-possession game, and they're sitting at 5-1 on the year. If you improve that, the Seahawks could be looking at a return to the Super Bowl for the first time since the infamous Malcolm Butler goal line interception. And also the defense needs to tighten up. They're 26th in yards allowed. They have 17 turnovers, but they need to stop relying on turnovers so much, and they need to lock down opposing defense or offenses earlier in possessions rather than playing so much of a bend but don't break mentality. And so if those two things happen, I believe this team can make a run to the postseason. Finally, we'll key in on the St. Louis Rams. The St. Louis Rams sit at 2-3 right now. And their schedule has just flip-flopped. They haven't lost 2 games in a row, but they haven't won 2 games in a row, as they've lost in weeks 1, 3, and 6, and won games in weeks 2 and 4. On offense, they're averaging 28 points per game, which is 18th in the league, with 366 yards per game, which is 15th. They're led by quarterback Ryan Ryan, which again is a great name, a guy so good that he has 2 first names. I mean, what's next? Are we going to name the next quarterback Steve Stevenson? But Ryan Ryan is leading the league, or not leading the league, excuse me. He's leading this team on this team's aerial attack with 63% completion for 1,423 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions with a 98.2 QBR. He also adds in 77 rushing yards. An interesting stat about this team and Ryan Ryan is that he has a QBR above 100 in each game that they have lost, and a QBR below 100 in each of their wins. And so it seems the better that Ryan Ryan plays, the worse this team does. They distribute the ball well through the air with 11 players recording reception and 5 players having double-digit reception. The team leaders in receptions are wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins and rookie third-round tight end Brennan Stump with 15 each. The team leader in yards is second-year wide receiver Chumphry Bryan. Again, where do we get these names from? Chumphry Bryan. But he has 13 catches for 335 yards and 4 touchdowns.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Now we interrupt this program to bring you a word from our sponsor, randomnamegenerator.info. In 5 seconds, I went to randomnamegenerator.info and I generated 10 random names better than EA did. And so here they are. First of all, we have John Barber, Tyrone Ballard, Michael Hodges, Sergio Hughes, Kelvin Douglas, Terrence Buchanan, Walter Cole, Keith Ward, Tom Brown, and Alton Hunt. And so there you have it, guys. 10 better names than the best and brightest at EA could come up with, all in 5 seconds or less. So visit our sponsor, randomnamegenerator.info. I'll leave the link in the description. And remember, if it takes more than 3 seconds to come up with a name, don't sweat it. Just Google it. We now resume our regularly scheduled programming. The ground game for the St. Louis Rams is led by running back Mario Alberry. Alberry has 72 carries for 384 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, and he has 5 touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, the Rams give up 36.8 points per game, which is 27th in the league, and 424 yards per game, which is 28th. And they have a negative point differential of 8.2 points. Their run defense is average, it's 13th, but their pass defense is being gashed as it's 29th in passing yards allowed. Strong safety Calvin Pryor is the leader of this defense with 46 tackles, and as a team, they've sacked the quarterback 13 times and forced 8 turnovers. And so how do the Rams at 2-3 make the playoffs in this loaded division? First of all, we need to see Ryan more involved in the rushing attack. This quarterback is faster than most running backs in the league, and they need to use him. 77 yards through 5 games is unacceptable for a quarterback with 93 speed. But one good thing they have going for them is they've only lost 1 division game. And so they need to win the remaining division games, starting with a trip to San Francisco this week for a divisional showdown. And then after that, they've got a fairly easy stretch of games they should be able to win at Tampa Bay, at home against Pittsburgh, and then at Cincinnati. And so if they can get through the 49ers this week and take care of business, all of a sudden they're sitting 6-3, and they still have 4 divisional games left to help put them over the top. But how do they do that? I believe on defense, their secondary has to step up and fast. You cannot continue to be such a horrific pass defense and expect to win in this league. There's simply too many teams that are far too good at passing the ball. And then they need to step up their game and cause some turnovers. 8 turnovers is not enough, especially when the defense is giving up so many yards. So again, Ryan needs to be more involved on the ground. The defense needs to tighten up the pass, and the defense needs to force some turnovers. So how do I see this division playing out? Well, last year, 3 teams from this division made the playoffs, which is the first time that's happened since 2013, when the Broncos, the Chiefs, and the Chargers all represented the AFC West. That could very well happen again this year. This division is good enough to get 3 teams into the playoffs, but my prediction is there's going to be 2 teams coming from this division, and the second wild card's either going to go to the NFC South, where you have a 3-way battle between the Saints, the Panthers, and the Falcons for the division, or to the NFC North, to the loser of the Michael Marquez and Alvin Boyce-led Vikings and Packers. So my prediction is NFC West gets 2 teams in, and the South or the North gets the other wild card team in. And so as we wrap this up, my assignment for you, I would like for you to send me the most ridiculous names on your team for a shout out in our next episode. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.